Somebody sent me this on Twitter, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. This is an old Malcolm X speech where he brings up police brutality. And it's basically like he had a crystal ball, and he was talking about Freddie Gray and Baltimore in 2015.
The controlled press, the white press, inflames the white public against Negroes. The police are able to use it to paint the Negro community as a criminal element. The police are able to use the press to make the white public think that 90% or 99% of the Negroes in the Negro community are criminals. And once the white public is convinced that most of the Negro community is a criminal element, then this automatically paves the way for the police to move into the Negro community, exercising Gestapo tactics, stopping any black man who is on the sidewalk, whether he is guilty or whether he is innocent, whether he is well-dressed or whether he is poorly dressed, whether he is educated or whether he is dumb, whether he's a Christian or whether he's a Muslim. As long as he is black and a member of the Negro community, the white public thinks that the white policeman is justified in going in there and trampling on that man's civil rights and on that man's human rights. Once the police have convinced the white public that the so-called Negro community is a criminal element, they can go in and question, brutalize, murder unarmed, innocent Negroes, and the white public is gullible enough to back them up. This makes the Negro community a police state. This makes the Negro neighborhood a police state. It's the most heavily patrolled. It has more police in it than any other neighborhood, yet it has more crime in it than any other neighborhood. How can you have more cops and more crime? Why? It shows you that the cops must be in cahoots with the criminals.
Every time I see that, I'm more and more impressed, because that really is as if somebody asked him a question right before he responded like that, and they said to him, Malcolm, what do you think of the situation in Baltimore in 2015 with Freddie Gray? And then he just responded. He did everything but, mention their names. That was absolutely incredible. And understand, man, this is what I think white people in general, specifically middle class, upper middle class, and rich white people struggle with. They don't get the idea. They can't wrap their mind around the concept that the relationship between the police and the black community, or police and minority communities, or police and poor people in general, is a totally different dynamic than the one that they're used to. Because to most white people, definitely white people who are upper middle class and rich, they genuinely see the police as, what do you mean? When something bad happens, you call them and they come and help you, and that's it. And the reason that they have that point of view is because that is what the police are for them. For them, it's unthinkable to them that, a police officer going to harass you when you're walking down the street? That's fucking crazy. They would never do that. Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense. But they don't get it that, dude, if you're a white guy and you're wearing a suit and tie and you're walking down the street, it's easy for that police officer to think, oh, that guy may have a congressman who's a dad, or maybe a Wall Street banker, may have some power. There's no way I'm going to stop and frisk that guy. Which is why you see it's reflected in the statistics. It's reflected in the numbers. When you look at stops and frisks in New York City, they never do it on Wall Street or in any higher income areas. They only do it to minorities. They only do it to black people and Hispanic people. And look, let's face it, if they were to do stops and frisks of some of the white guys wearing suits and ties, plenty of times you'd find cocaine. We just did a story yesterday. A lot of these guys are taking Adderall without a prescription because it helps them when they're bankers and they have to work long hours. A lot of these guys have business cards for, high-price hookers that they go to all the time. But they're not going to go after those people, again, for systemic reasons. They're not going to go after those people because they know that those people may have power. So there's nothing objective about this. There's nothing fair about this. And when you look at what the police do in minority communities and poor communities, it's honestly just a shakedown in many respects. Look at the recent Ferguson report from the Department of Justice. What did they find about Ferguson? That 25% of the revenue for their budget comes from, fining black people for petty offenses. This is the problem with the broken window style policing. It's just a license to discriminate and harass people. This is the problem with the drug war, for example. Again, it's a green light for cops to just abuse authority and go after people who shouldn't be in fucking jail. So you want to take a substance and change your consciousness slightly. That means you should be locked in a cage for 10 years or 30 years? And then you become part of the system, and then, oftentimes you become an actual criminal and a hardened criminal when you have to go into the system. And what happens when you come back out? It's a vicious cycle. And it's a vicious cycle that's almost by design. Look, Karl Marx, he was wrong about many things in my opinion, but he did have this brilliant idea and this brilliant theory called conflict theory, which is the idea that criminal justice in a capitalist society is not actually like, justice is blind, the law applies to everybody equally. No. It's a tool of the rich to keep the lower classes in line and to establish a social order. It's essentially segregation or Jim Crow under a new name. That's why they have that new book called The New Jim Crow, which is about the drug war. You're incarcerating insane numbers of people in the minority community, and you've just changed the plantation. It used to be the actual plantation, and now, we just throw you in a jail cell once you hit your teenage years because you smoked a little weed. Meanwhile, you got white people smoking weed all over the place. They just don't get searched as much, and they don't get in trouble as much for doing it. And the studies show that as well. Blacks and whites use drugs at the same rate, but black people get arrested way more often for it. He said, the white press paints the Negro community as a criminal element. And then that means that white people start to think that anything is justified against this criminal element. And that is so true. Which is why you see now in the media, as right after the riots, what happened? The conversation was only about the riots. It was never about, hey, look at what happened which led to the riot. What was the cause? What was the root of this? What got people out there on the streets in the first place? That's out of the conversation. And then the conversation just became, oh, look at the riots. All these people are horrible. These people are criminals. These people are terrible. These people are thugs. And then they would have a debate about the word thug. Why can't you call them thugs? They are criminals, aren't they? Look, like I said, if you want to call them thugs, fine, but then you also have to call the police officers who killed the unarmed black kids thugs also, and they never do that. Why don't they do that? Because of the dynamic that Malcolm X just explained perfectly right there. The dynamic of you have the press painting minority communities as a criminal element, and then in a subconscious way to white people, they start to think, well, yeah, I guess harsh police tactics are okay because it's a criminal element. It's a criminal community, so of course you can go in there and be really aggressive and use essentially Gestapo tactics. You know what it is, man? It's the idea of guilty enough. The idea of, well, what do you expect? The cops have a hard job and the communities are dangerous, so guilty enough. Go in there, crack down on them, put them in jail for smoking weed, put them in jail for pissing on the street after having a few beers, put them in jail in debtor's prison in some cases. That's more with private companies, and that's another conversation for another day. But basically, be an occupying force in a community and have a standoffish attitude. And what ends up happening? There's going to be a backlash. Because people do not feel like they're free, and they certainly don't have the same opportunities that you have in middle-class communities, upper-middle-class communities, rich communities, and white communities. So how do we fix this? You have to change the culture of policing, you have to tweak the laws, and you have to give people equal opportunity to succeed. And you have to stop treating them in a broad way like a criminal element, so I guess anything is justified, including beating your ass and severing your spine because you're a black kid who happened to look at me the wrong way, which is exactly what happened in the Freddie Gray story.